Welcome everyone to Anand's conversation, part of a research for an upcoming doc on the rise of anti-Semitism, the reasons for this persistent problem and some unlikely solutions. Please like, comment, subscribe below to the channel. With me as usual is Michael Laitman, Doctor of Biocybernetics and PhD in Philosophy and Kabbalah, author of more than 50 books translated into 18 languages, including Like a Bundle of Reeds, Why Unity and Mutual Guarantee Are the Call of the Hour. Thank you so much for taking the time week after week to discuss this topic. And from New Jersey, Joshua Goldstein is chairman of Herut North America's U.S. Division, an international movement dedicated to the unity of the Jewish people. Good day, Joshua. Thanks for being here as well.
Good to be here. Thank you.
And so I want to start with you, Joshua. Your organization is dedicated to among many other things, to uniting Jewish people. I've read some of the articles. I've seen. How is the work of uniting the Jews coming along?
Well, we're starting to gain some traction. It's not something that's discussed. It's not something that's talked about, and but we're trying to raise consciousness so people could actually make this like a byword or a buzzword, so to speak. Like it's not even in the repertoire. So we are making more and more contact by pushing this message more and more on social media and on articles, and start to get people to say, hey, wait a minute, you're right. We need to have some Jewish unity.
I'm curious because we hear a lot. I mean, everyone who's been listening to these talks here, Dr. Laitman speaking about Jewish unity as a necessity. Dr. Laitman, can you, in short, make the connection between Jewish unity and anti-Semitism? Is one just a threat that reminds us that our strength is in unity, or is there a deeper connection between these two things?
Okay, I think I'll have to give a brief summary of the whole thing after all. The thing is that the people of Israel is not an ordinary nation. It is a collection of many different small nations, tribes that existed in ancient Babylon about 3,500 years ago, in the days of Abraham. And so they began to feel that human egoism was growing to become the biggest disturbance in social life. This is truly what the Torah talks about, and other sources as well. And they didn't know what to do about it, and their priest or spiritual leader, again, this is also mentioned in the Torah, he started researching what's going on with all those people in Babylon. Why can't they live well with each other as they did before? And he discovered that there is a natural dynamic, a law of nature, which is the natural growth of human egoism. That is the drive of human evolution. And so he also discovered that it's possible to rise above that ego, to overcome it, to make such efforts of connection where we come together despite this growing ego that naturally separates us. And so, as we discover that we are in clash with each other, this is what we need to do. So he started speaking about it with the Babylonians, and eventually, when there were such social rifts and conflicts, whereas before it was very calm and peaceful socially, and they started getting into harsh conflicts with each other. So what he did was he explained to everyone that they should unite above the differences. So he basically said, whoever wants to work on unity, come to me. Let's build a society where love covers all crimes, as it says. And many of the Babylonians followed him. This is also what the Maimonides writes about 2,000 years later. He writes that he gathered many people around him. And in that time in ancient Babylon, There were many small nations. Babylon was sort of the cultural center of human civilization. And so in that group that Abraham put together, there were basically representatives from all nations. And he gathered them, and because it went against the king Nimrod, who was the king of ancient Babylon, they had to leave ancient Babylon, and they went towards the land of Canaan, which is Israel of today. And since then, that group exists. So that group was not originally a nation like other nations. It's a collection of all the other groups and nations and tribes that existed in ancient Babylon. And so Jews are actually not a nation. There are 70 nations, 70 unique roots of all the nations of the world, and the people of Israel is not of those roots. It's a collection from all of them. So what's happening here is a unique dynamic. The moment they began to unite among them, they started discovering all sorts of new phenomena, new discoveries. They started managing and restricting their ego and conducting themselves above the human ego. And so they followed that maxim of love covers all crimes, love of Israel, all Israel are responsible for each other, and so forth. And those were the principles by which they existed for a long time until they entered the exile of Egypt. And what it really means is that the Pharaoh, meaning the human ego, ruled over them until they emerged from it and received the Torah. The Torah refers to the method of connection. That means they already had a method, meaning after going through some preparation, they now had a method of how to connect. And that method is mostly predicated on mutual guarantee, arvut, meaning that everyone cares for the other, everyone is a guarantor for the other. And so from there, they came back to the land of Israel. They lived there for about 1,000 years, and their ego kept growing, just like it grows in the whole world. And they couldn't always overcome it, and that's why they too fell into wars, just like the nations from Babylon who scattered to all directions, like Josephus writes about it. All the wars that happened between them due to the growing ego. Similarly, in the people of Israel, there were all sorts of fights and clashes and conflicts, to the point that they stopped feeling that they belonged to a single unified nation, but they developed into all kinds of factions and streams and different communities and so forth, to the point that the differences between them ultimately ruined the society they had, and they went out to exile, which we exist in for the last 2,000 years. What's interesting here is that the whole fate of the world is dependent on the connection between those people in that group called Israel. Israel comes from the word yashar kel Israel, which means straight towards that force, the higher force of unity. And that group was scattered across all nations, the whole world, because it couldn't maintain its unity. But what's interesting is that the kind of behavior it had on the inside became the behavior of all the nations around it towards that group. So if they are unified, the whole world treats them in a positive way, and all the other nations come towards each other in a positive way. And if that group called Israel, the Jews, Yehudi, by the way, Jewish comes from the word Yehudi, unity, unified. And so if those people cannot connect between them and overcome their ego, then the whole world finds itself in conflict as well. And nations develop hatred towards each other as well as hatred towards the Jews. And they begin to see the Jews as some sort of a part of humanity that is redundant, they have an instinctive urge to say, if we destroy them, then conflicts will subside, then troubles in the world will subside. They have that instinct. And so what we call anti-Semitism in modern language, it surfaces, it rises when Jews are in conflict between them. And when Jews unite, and when they overcome the differences between them, anti-Semitism subsides, and the nations of the world develop a more positive attitude towards the Jews. All of that dynamic is happening so that the Jewish people will unite as one man and one heart. All Israel are friends with each other, as it says, and so forth. And when we unite, we will necessarily drive the whole world towards connection, drive all nations towards connection as well. And so, especially in our time, when human egoism is peaking, and yet we are not delivering that unity among the Jewish people, that puts the nations of the world in great conflict. And accordingly, anti-Semitism will rise even higher and turn against us. Excuse me. So that's basically how it works, and that's how we exist today. In the 21st century, we've reached a point where, according to the process, according to the history, the historical process and where we are now, we must achieve unity, because the whole world becomes connected, the whole world becomes globally interdependent, and that's why humanity has to also be in accord with this interconnected reality. And all of that depends on the people of Israel, on how they will realize their historical vocation, their unity, because their unity drives unity in the whole world. And that's the state we're in today. That's why our state is vital. It's critical. If we do that, things will be good. If we don't, things will be very bad. And God forbid we may reach another kind of Holocaust or world wars and so forth, and Jews will be to blame, and it will be clear to everyone else that they are guilty for this global crisis that is occurring in the world. So that's the state as of today, that everything relies on Jewish unity.
I want to know, do you also feel that correlation that Dr. Laitman just painted right now?
Well, this is something that I've been exploring in the text and in tradition, and it seems like there's a reactionary response to anti-Semitism, where Jews have to, by the nature of the fact that they are threatened, and there is a clear and present danger that they have to unite. So that would seem to be like one level or that Jews would unite on. But in the greater scheme, it seems like if you look at a lot of the teachings of the rabbis and of the sayings, like Rabbi Laitman was saying, the Jews actually just need to connect, because we have to treat each other as brothers and sisters, and that seems to be like a higher form of it. So, the question that people ask me all the time is, well, if we didn't have anti-Semitism, what would actually hold the Jewish people together? And so some people say, well, they would probably tear each other apart, at least at this point in time, because we've become so opinionated and so separated, as Rabbi was saying about the rise of the ego. So that was always a question in my mind, like whether the rise of anti-Semitism will force us to become unified, but then when in the absence of that, do we just go back to our corners, or do we, at the higher level, we need to just actually make this part and parcel of our teachings and what we push for, what we look for.
Well, in my understanding, no, anti-Semitism will not actually help us unite. It never did before. It only makes the Jews scatter in all kinds of directions and go to all kinds of corners of the world. It doesn't actually induce unity and connection. It never did. I don't see anti-Semitism as a cure. It does act in order to shake Israel, the Jews, and push them. But we never seen, even if you think about the ghettos of Warsaw or other cases where death is imminent, where or being burned in the gas chambers. Even that didn't cause Jews to actually unite. It didn't make them inclined to unite with each other. So I never seen that example. There was something that happened in the days of the Maccabees. This is beyond 2,000 years ago. The war with the Greeks, and not just the Greeks on the outside, but the Hellenizing Jews on the inside. But again, we shouldn't wait from the negative side of anti-Semitism to push us to love each other and unite with each other and understand our connection. It's not going to work that way. We can only call that brothers in arms. And the moment that anti-Semitism subsides a little bit, they draw farther from each other once again, and even more. You see what's happening today. Jews are willing to assimilate in all kinds of ways, wherever possible, to hide wherever they are, to hide their Jewish identity. They don't realize, however, that in this attitude of connection to each other, that's how we can actually eradicate anti-Semitism from the world.
Both, Josh, I read in an article I think you published last year, and I think with Moshe Phillips, I talk about the arvut, right? The need for unity, and Kabbalah speaks about the arvut. I hear that word all the time, the mutual guarantee. And it sounds, beyond the promise of maybe thwarting anti-Semitism, maybe even eradicating it. It sounds like there's an even greater promise there. It sounds such a tasty thing to be engaged in when everybody's thinking of you. You think of everybody. Why is it so hard to be in arvut? But I'm curious to hear from both of you. What did you find? What's the barrier to be in arvut?
Well, from what I understand, there's three major things that keep people from uniting. One, there's an actual fear of being corrupted by the other groups and their way of thinking, and this has a lot to do with pride and ego, and it's a reactionary fear that comes from an ego-based perspective, as opposed to looking at things and then evaluating them and being able to say, I hear what you're saying. I don't necessarily agree with it, but there's an inherent fear that people will go off the path if they become or adopt certain perspectives. Like people, they send their son to yeshiva. Their son gets more religious, and then the parents get very threatened by that, as opposed to saying, okay, whereas in today's thought, if a person decided that he wanted to wear ripped jeans, parents would say, well, that's not how we grew up, but you can wear what you want. But it's more visceral, and it's much more closer to home, that it strikes a fear. So that's one thing that I see that's a big issue for people for uniting. Another one is the educational divides that occur in the educational process, both as a child and as an adult. There's always some sort of undercurrent or offhand remark It might be said at a shiur or at a dinner table or that's unchallenged. Some negative thought about, oh, those religious people or those non-religious people, however you want to explain the divisive comment, but it's not countered. And there's people just let it pass, and so people then just accept it as being normal. They allow these prejudices and these negative comments to just be part of the conversation without actually examining it. And a lot of that comes from well-intentioned teachers who, unfortunately, we all have biases, and we don't realize that we're using those biases in our teachings. And as children and as adults, we just sort of accept what the Rav would say or what the other teacher would say without applying any critical thinking. And then thirdly, I think the biggest factor that we've touched upon is the fact that there's no real sense of Jewish pride. If you meet another Jew, the first thing you should say, wow, this is another Jew. We don't have that feeling of pride for other Jews. We actually use our critical and our judgmental thinking to say, well, what kind of Jew are you? And now the divisions start to occur because we start to judge them. So I think one of the bigger things that we need to accomplish is the fact that we should take pride in the fact that there are other types of Jews. Maybe they don't dress or practice the same way as you, but there's a lack of a national pride for being Jewish. And that's never discussed or taught. And I think it's very important to have this national pride. Not so much to walk around and being, I'm a chosen person, therefore I'm special, but to really resonate and recognize that there are other Jews out there. They are very special people too. We all came back from Abraham. And so we have a responsibility for the other person. Almost like if you meet a distant cousin, you get excited because, hey, I didn't know I had this cousin. As opposed to looking at this cousin and say, who are you? Why should I even talk to you? I don't even accept you because of the way you look or the way you dress or the way you speak. So it's just not in our lexicon to have this idea of Jewish pride in a positive, constructive way. Because if there was an overlying principle that we all had, we would start to stop the conversation with the criticisms and the negativity and the judgment and the uber judgmentalism that occurs. But we don't have that. It's just not in our lexicon. It's not even in our consciousness anymore. So we need to have that overriding principle, that we should love every Jew as we should love every Jew as we love ourselves. And it's lost. I think that's one of the biggest challenges we have. Like every company has a mission statement. Every organization has a mission statement. As Jews, we've lost our mission statement in terms of the idea of Jewish unity and of having Jewish pride and just, hey, you're Jewish, great, love to meet you.
Dr. Laitman, is Jewish pride what's needed? What else? Can we do it?
Yeah, but where will it come from? Because again, we come from a collection of representatives from all the nations of the world. There is no connection between us the way there is in other nations. In every nation, there is a foundational family they came from, whether it's Norwegian or Swedish or French or whatever. It comes from a certain kind of genealogy that gave birth to descendants that eventually became that nation. That's how it developed in history. We didn't develop like that. We didn't come from a single mother and father biologically. We came from different mothers and fathers to begin with, and then we united, gathered together despite our differences. That's what Abraham did. He brought all those people together, and therefore we're not a nation the way other nations are to begin with. And that's why we don't have that instinctive attraction to each other. If I feel good living among other people somewhere in the world, I'll do it. As long as I don't feel anti-Semitism there, as long as I don't have any threat there. That's our nature. And so that's one thing. The second thing is that if we want to unite, we have to make conscious efforts, because it's like different nations from different origins want to come together. It's like me and another family. And again, I'm talking about no external threat. If there's no external pressure, I don't have any instinctive inclination to be together with another Jew. No, he and I, it's not for no reason they say that every Jew builds two synagogues. One that he goes into and another one that he never goes into. It's not just a joke, it represents our nature. It's not a joke. So there is a problem that the nations of the world do have a deep-seated demand towards us. They have some sense that we're robbing them of the better future of humanity, and that if something happens in reality, it happens because of the Jews. Why? Because if the Jews unite, if we were to unite with each other, the world would be great. The world would be paradise. That's what the Torah says, and it's right. And it has to be that way, because if we are a collection that represents all the nations of the world, when we unite, it necessitates all the nations of the world to unite. And that brings peace to the whole world. And it brings peace and love for the whole world. So we are actually guilty in that there are conflicts and troubles and problems in the world. If there's any kind of conflict among human beings or nations or countries, then Jews have a part in that. That is true. Jews are to blame. And look, what the nations have been saying for thousands of years already, and it's also written in the Torah that it all depends on the people of Israel. So what can we do? We have to look at these roots and face them. And so until we actually work on our unity, we will never be better off, and the world will get worse, and its attitude towards us will get worse, and blows will push us, to necessitate us to come together. But that will be in horrible ways, just like putting us in a ghetto and in horrible situations. And so the world is also in the same dynamic. But if the world will give us the freedom to just separate from each other, to scatter, to keep scattering, then the world too will crumble. And that's why there's this instinctive reaction of the world. It's a law of nature. We need to understand we live in the whole of nature, in a system that has laws, and this is embedded into the laws of nature. The world is pressuring us to bring us to come together, to drive us to come together, and when we do that, then we bring calmness to the world, and that's the balance we have to maintain. And today we're in a very, very delicate, sensitive state, because human ego is peaking, and we're facing a horrible, interdependent, multi-layered crisis, economically, socially, politically, but it can all come to balance if the people of Israel will become unified and connected and close to each other. If we do that, all layers of our reality will come into balance, still vegetative, animate, and human. We will bring balance and healing and peace to the whole system. And if we don't do it, I don't even want to talk about how bad things can be. The end of the introduction to the book of Zohar talks about the horrible states that may occur. So there's nothing coincidental here, and we don't need to add all kinds of philosophies to this. We're talking about laws of nature that we're facing. We have to understand them as laws, just like any other laws of nature, and then see how to use them in the right way, how to respond to them correctly. Please.
I definitely, just from listening to reading your books and listening to your ideas, how would you say that most Jews are absolutely ignorant of the fact that our collective beginnings began with the groups of many different people that Abraham brought together? That's nowhere discussed anywhere. And I think that's a pivotal issue that would help people to understand that, hey, there's no such thing as one type of a Jew or a true blood type of a Jew. And that would actually help people, at least in the educative function of understanding that we are actually always been connected.
Ken?
Yes.
No, Dr. Laitman, you said we have to change our nature. How do we change our nature? It sounds a bit of like a tall order. You're born the way you're born. Jews are Jews, for good or for worse. How do we?
For that, actually, this is what the actual Torah is intended for. But it's not the Torah that we're familiar with, but rather it's the wisdom of Kabbalah, the essence of the Torah. It talks about how we can actually come together. And what's interesting here is that to the extent that we actually create these bonds between us, we influence all the other levels of nature, from the inanimate to the vegetative to the animate to the human level. We bring all of them into harmony, all of them into that complete interconnection that the world needs today. And otherwise it leads to crisis and crumbling of the world. That's why we're guilty. That's what depends on us, that connection between us. Now, how to do it? There is a method. It's called the wisdom of Kabbalah. And what it talks about is how we can actually realize what Abraham wrote about, that love covers all crimes, that even though we start from animosity and even hostility and even hatred towards each other, we can rise above that, we can transcend that, and cover that with love. Create bonds of love, and then we live on both levels. It's called the evil inclination and the good inclination. Both exist, one covers the other. That's the only way we can coexist. Two forms of nature, plus and minus, that exist together. They need each other. And that opens up a whole range of possibilities between us in terms of how to rebuild our ecological system and our family units and our social systems and everything from this world to the higher world, and all states in between. It only happens through that connection between opposites that the wisdom of Kabbalah describes how to do. But to at least comprehend the concept and understand that we have no choice but to become like that, even just that awareness can bring the world calmness. Please.
Joshua, you're also I know you're a licensed acupuncturist, Chinese medicine practitioner, yin and yang, plus and minus. You understand the importance of the balance of the entire organism, right?
Correct.
You're talking with a lot of Jews, different places, the World Zionist Organization, everywhere. Do you feel that Jews feel that they exert this kind of influence on the entire organism, that if they learn how to correct it, as Kabbalah suggests, that do you think that awareness is even there? Is it a matter of reigniting it, or is it totally lost?
Currently, if you were to go to some of the meetings, you would not feel too much love. And there would be a lot of strife, and people want to get their points across. So no, I don't think I think we've only touched the surface. And the reason I got involved in this, well, just to give you an example, I have a handicapped brother who we would take to shul with us on Yom Kippur, and he wasn't able to read or stay for a very long service. I know most people need to take breaks, even in a normal sense, but he was actually yelled at by a few people for wandering the halls and not being in the synagogue. Now, this was, again, it's like 30 years ago when handicapped people were not as accepted as they are today. Today, everybody knows about handicapped people. They're much more mainstream than the Jewish community. There are even organizations that will give them housing and help them to find certain types of jobs. And there's even social organizations that will help them socialize with each other. And this is a massive change than what it was. And so what it has done, it has sensitized people. So they hear handicap, they don't even have a problem anymore. They accept it. So just like that had to take time to occur, it's important to start pushing the idea of Jewish unity, both in educative school, in the schools, both in people talking, doing more lectures on this, using the word Jewish unity more and more, because as a collective group, we don't have that. It's not there's no such thing as we should just work with other Jews. It's not in our lexicon. And I think as practically, we understand the spiritual issues of why this is occurring. Practically, most people are never exposed to this, grew up in their biases, and they live in their biases. So I think we have a good opportunity now to mainstream this idea as well.
Dr. Laitman, I have a question. It always comes to me when we have these talks. It's been, according to how you describe the history of the Jews, it's been 2,000 years since Jews were really in the degree of love, right? As we call the temple, the first and second temples, those degrees of love, brotherly love. Love covers all, arvut. We see all the resistance that these people have to uniting. I feel it inside of me. Even maybe is it possible? Maybe it's not for us. Maybe someone else will bring the correction. Maybe it's not us. It's 2,000 years. Are we beating a dead horse? I have to ask.
Nature does not follow your time. It rather follows certain states that have to unfold, and according to nature's plan, Jews must achieve their unity, rekindle their unity, and those inclinations of unity will then permeate all nations, and then the whole world will come to unity as well. If we don't do that, especially as we're coming to this point in time where humanity is becoming globally interdependent, it becomes a single organism across the world. If we don't deliver that, then the response of humanity towards us will be extreme pressure and extreme threats that we will nevertheless be pushed to do what we have, but it will first happen in a very bad way, very unpleasant way. And that's why I see that we have no choice and that we're falling behind. And we have to start explaining to everyone that it is the responsibility of Jews all over to come together and unite. And it doesn't matter what kind of Jews, where they're from, in what way they're considered Jews, what exactly is their Jewish belief, this way or that way. You know how many different kinds of camps and streams and factions we have between us. We simply have to develop the sense that we're all a single unity, a single unit. And by that, we will necessarily drive the whole world towards greater connection. And conflicts will subside, because all conflicts in the world result from that lack of connection between us. the representatives of humanity, the Jews. And so that's how the whole world needs to come to the correct connection. It will not disappear from the world. Don't think things will simply get better. No, they'll get worse. From day to day, we are falling behind, and so God forbid, we may come to another kind of Holocaust. It is bubbling, and it may erupt, and actually in the U.S. And that's why I'm very not calm about the situation. The relationship between Jews, the connection between Jews, and also the relationship between the Jews and Israel, that they're not, first of all, pushing Israel towards connection. That is very concerning, very bothering and troubling. I see it as a threat over the well-being of the whole world, because at the end of the day, it may all culminate in a world war, and it's not that far if Jews will not start inducing connection rather than dispersion. Please.
Joshua, you feel that urgency?
I feel that we definitely have a double urgency. One, the existential threat, as we just discussed, and on a much more micro level, the anti-Semitism in proportion to the lack of unity is starting to get people more to look closer at this idea, as opposed to just dismissing it out entirely. And I think we have the means, we have the technology. If we just we have to start from a few articles to a few events to many events till everybody starts adopting this idea.
We're about to, reach the end of this talk. I want to finish on a high note. Joshua, on your website, you say the preservation of the Jewish nation is focused on creating an ideal society defined by unity, love, and justice, that we have to lead by example. And Dr. Laitman, this is what Kabbalah explains as well. Can you maybe give us, each of you...
ודאי.
Of course, absolutely.
Where are we going? What's that society, what can it look like if we apply it? Can you give us a taste of that vision?
Well, okay, I would say this. We're making efforts in my organization to disseminate this knowledge to everyone, all nations of the world, not just the Jews, because we all have to work on unity together, in fact. We have to work on the unity of the people of Israel, and as a result, the unity of the whole world. The unity of the world will not happen without the unity of the Jews happening, and to the extent that the Jewish unity will happen. And therefore, I also address all the nations of the world, and I'm inviting everyone in a positive, welcoming, inviting way to help that unity happen, and to help Jewish unity happen. They need to understand where anti-Semitism is coming from, and that in fact they're right about it. They're right for having that sense of hatred towards us, but the solution of violence, hatred, and killing us, that's incorrect. We instead have to work with the law of nature that acts between us and learn how to respond to it in the right way, because it is a law of nature. That is what I am calling for, and I do hope that we'll succeed, and I am happy very much to see in front of me this example of a Jewish person who has that concern and is working for it and working on it and trying to bring Jews together and realizing that our future depends on Jewish unity. So at least we create this unity between us. Right, Joshua?
Joshua, give me in 1 minute, what's your dream, your vision for that ideal state of unity, love? What does it look like? What does it feel like?
Well, I think it's going to be a mosaic. People are going to be different from all of their different backgrounds, all their different traditions, and all of their thought. But I think there has to be more discussion and less finger pointing. And I think on a very practical level, there has to be a sense where, hey, wait a minute, you're Jewish? Okay, let's have a discussion rather than an argument now, because you are, we are all Jewish, and there's something special about that. There's a pride about being Jewish, and fostering some of these messages, like we've talked about, both on a philosophical basis, which I think is very important to get a certain segment of people on board, to just practical things that we can do to change the rhetoric that we spread toward each other. So I think it would actually be more enriching, because if we could really pool all our resources together, the education would be incredible. The help opportunities would be great. People would know about what issues are going on in other people's community, and the response time and the outpouring would be great. There'd be a lot more that we could do to unite each other with our resources, both monetary, time, socially, and I think it would just make our environment just so much more better.
And the world around us, I hear, will change as we change, right? So,
yeah.
Okay. So, thank you everyone for taking the time. Joshua, Dr. Laitman, please everyone share, comment below. We want to hear what you have to say.
And I'm inviting our friend Joshua to come here to visit us if he's around here in Israel, and I'd like to invite you also to become familiar with different centers that we have in the U.S. If we all come together, we can make our goal closer and have a great New Year.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Shana Tova, have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.